All right, third graders, it's still hat/helmet day, so I'm reading with my helmet on. So they were just fighting about the cookie, and the boys were just kind of getting in a fight. That's enough, Mr. Pedansky yelled. It wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. Stop, shouted Mr. Pedansky. The side of Stanley's face was pressed flat against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fist slammed off of his arms and pounded his face into the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then suddenly Zigzag was off of him. Stanley managed to look up, and he saw that Zero had his arm around Zigzag's long neck. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he desperately tried to pry Zero's arm off of him. Zero kept squeezing. Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell to the ground in different directions. The other counselors came running from the office. The tents are out on the lake. The warden walked over from her cabin. There was a riot, Mr. Pedansky told her. Zero almost strangled Ricky. The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. What happened to you? Nothing. It wasn't a riot. Ziggy was kind of roughing up on Caveman and Armpit. Then Zero started choking Zigzag, and I had to pull Zero off of Zigzag. They just got a little hot, that's all, said X-Ray. You know how it is, in the sun all day, people get hot, right? But everything's cool now. I see, the warden said. She turned to Zigzag. What's the matter? Didn't you get a puppy for your birthday? Zig's just a little hot, said X-Ray. Out in the sun all day, you know how it is. The blood starts to boil. Is that what happened, Zigzag? Asked the warden. Yeah, said Zigzag, like X-Ray said, working so hard in the hot sun while Caveman just sits around doing nothing. My blood boiled. Excuse me, said the warden. Caveman digs holes just like everyone else. Zigzag shrugged. Sometimes. Excuse me. Zero's been digging part of Caveman's hole every day, said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. I'm teaching him to read and write, said Stanley. It's sort of a trade. The hole still gets dug. So what does it matter who digs it? Excuse me, said the warden. Isn't it more important for him to learn to read? Stanley asked. Doesn't that build character more than digging holes? That's his character, said the warden. What about your character? Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden turned to Zero. Well, Zero, what have you learned so far? Zero said nothing. Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing? The warden asked him. He likes to dig holes, said Mr. Pedansky. Tell me what you've learned yesterday, said the warden. Surely you can remember that. Zero said nothing. Mr. Pedansky laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, you might as well try to teach the shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero. The at sound, said Zero. The at sound, repeated the warden. Well then, tell me, what does C-A-T spell? Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. Cat, Zero said. Mr. Pedansky clapped his hands. Bravo, bravo, the boy's a genius. F-A-T, asked the warden. Zero thought a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the f sound. Zero whispered. Fat. How about hat? Asked the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound either. Zero concentrated hard, then said, chat? All the counselors laughed. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pedansky. He's not smart. He doesn't even know he's not smart. Stanley didn't know why Mr. Pedansky seemed to have it in for Zero. If Mr. Pedansky only thought about it, he realized it was very logical for Zero to think that the letter H made the ch sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anyone else's hole, said the warden. And no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, said the warden. She turned to Stanley. You know why you're digging holes? Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole for you, then you're not learning your lesson, are you? I guess not, Stanley mumbled, although he knew they weren't digging just to learn a lesson. She was looking for something that belonged to Kissing Kate Barlow. Why can't I dig my own hole, but still teach Zero to read, he asked. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. It causes them stress, said Mr. Pedansky. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it, Zero's not smart to learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pedansky handed him the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good for. Zero took the shovel, then he swung it like a baseball hat. Metal blade smashed across Mr. Pedansky's face. His knees crumbled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Zero kept backing up out of the cluster of holes. The boys had been digging them farther and farther out onto the lake. He's going to have to come back here for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of the counselors helped Mr. Pedansky to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out toward Zero, but he had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselors to take turns guarding the shower room and rec room all day and all night. They were not to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, "It's almost time for me to paint my nails again." Before she left, she told the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. I wonder what's going to happen to Zero, if he's ever going to come back or not, third graders.